Namaskar and welcome to our program. Our guest today is the Assistant Director General of ILO. She's also the Regional Director for the Asia Pacific region. We are delighted to have on our program today Ms. Tomoko Nishimoto. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
What is the kind of work that ILO does?
Well, ILO is part of the United Nations system, and it's actually one of the oldest organizations.
96 years now.
96 years now. Will be 100 years old in 2019. It was founded after the World War I, preceding the United Nations, so at the time of the League of Nations. The overall, in one word, is the social justice that we have the big mandate there. The way we work is not only the government, because the United Nations is primarily an intergovernmental setup, but ILO is unique in the sense that not only we work with the government, but also we have two social partners from the workers group and employers group, what we call tripartite mechanism. And we facilitate the consensus building debates on the issues related to the labor market, broader social justice system at the headquarters level and also make the global policies, conventions, international standards on the labor matters at the global level. But also at the regional and country level, we have a number of country offices and regional offices and work closely with the social partners and the government to bring that normative framework and instrument on the ground and make a difference for the people in those countries.
Now this works on a ratio of 2:1:1, isn't it? The tripartite participation of the governments and the labor and the employers. Do you think somewhere labor gets the kind of voice or the platform it needs?
Well, definitely that's the beauty of the tripartite system. Right. Up to the highest organ of the ILO, we have not only the voice of the workers, but all these three parties have the right to vote. So when the consensus, of course, the consensus first, and the voices heard from three parties, and when it is very difficult to have the consensus, we have the final, voting as the last resort, and they can even vote, which is very unusual in the intergovernmental system, in the UN system. And I think it is a very important mechanism to bring, as you say, the voice often neglected in the discussion, development discussion, national discussion. Those who are, so to speak, the bottom of the pyramids, so to speak, the vulnerable, tend to be the workers group will be the one that the voice for those people.
And especially because particularly in the Asian region, there is a lot of unorganized labor. So how do they get a voice?
That is true. It is when we have the workers group represented, we will be primarily looking at the trade unions organized group, and they have their own, ways of making sure the representation of the workers group from a particular country is following the process of having the most represented, so to speak, trade unions in the ILO's governance system. At the same time, ILO has facilitated the number of trade unions, big, small, in the different sectors, trade unions coming together and have a unity to send a common message, common concerns broadly. Of course, together they can have a bigger voice. So in that sense, also we provide a platform in different format with agreement of the most represented trade union. Often the most represented unions are also very amicable to have that kind of platform, because they also know it is in the interest to have a broader issues brought together, brought into the table and then discussed. So I've seen quite a number of countries. We were not just going in there and then talking to one representative trade union, but through them and through the platform, there is a very vibrant discussion with many trade unions. And often also we have the ways of reaching out unorganized group, domestic workers, for example, is very pertinent for Asian countries as well as India. During this time that I visited, this is my 5th day, I had the privilege of going there, interacting with the domestic workers, some organized, some trying to organize, some unorganized, and NGOs and other, organizations to sensitize them, what is their right, and so on. So we have many ways of reaching out to bring in the voice of the workers, organized as well as the unorganized, and many sectors.
I think the thing with the unorganized labor, especially as you said, domestic labor, is the lack of awareness of their rights. Have you faced that often?
That's true.
Are you addressing that?
We do have the Convention for the Rights of the Domestic Workers. Not widely ratified, but it sets the international standards. So definitely we are promoting the standard enshrined in that convention. And the awareness is definitely is an issue. Once they are aware, and also the visitor that I went, it's not only just aware of the rights, but also they are helping to analyze their situation, where they are now, what they can have, their dreams, their aspirations, and then what they can do in order to bring those aspirations and visions, better life for yourself, better life for your children. What can they do to bring that as a reality? So it's not just I have the rights, but it is very much grounded in their reality. How can we help them to voice their dreams and the grievances to the place where it can be resolved, it can be addressed. So I think there are a number of self-help groups, NGOs, even indeed in many parts of Asia and Pacific, being actually the convention for the domestic workers has made that push very possible in many parts.
So is there a platform where a domestic worker can take her or his grievances to where it can be addressed? Are you providing that kind of support structures as well? We
were not in as such ILO as such that we have a center where they drop in. That is not the main areas of work as the ILO as such, but we set the standard. I do understand that there is also a lack of such mechanism in India as well as many other countries. So in some cases, collaborating with the other organizations who are best placed to provide that on the ground the services and support, we help them to come closer to the domestic workers. In that, for example, what is the right enshrined, what is the standard internationally, making a small brochures available, information available, what are other countries' experience, best practices, bringing in through those organizations who are best placed on the ground. So that kind of support services, bringing the knowledge, bringing the international standard.
And this is the kind of knowledge that also needs to be disseminated to the employer.
Exactly, exactly. Yes, very, very true. It's a two-way conversation, as well as the government also. The whole picture has to be complete. The workers are aware, employers also are aware, and there is a very constructive discussion can take place. Services are provided when that breaks down, and the government is also providing services outside of the employers and employee area. For example, many of the domestic workers comes from so-called slum areas where the waters are not there, the health services are not there. When those social services and the protection mechanisms in place as a national scheme, it helps a lot in makes the better living condition for the workers. And when they come to the home workplace, that's also very interesting. A lot of people do not see the house or home as a workplace. That this is the workplace. This is the services provided. It has to be properly enumerated. It has to be properly so-called contracted. When you do overtime. In an office, overtime is kind of automatically, it comes to your mind. But in a home, if you are not seeing this as a workplace, often, or you just do extra more things and then you go home and not compensate it for extra work overtime. So that's a kind of awareness building in all parties, workers, employers, and the government. I see is a critical part. If one element is lacking, the success is impaired.
One very interesting initiative of the ILO is the FOW, the Future of Work Initiative. What is this about?
Well, this is again in relation to the 100 years old organization, looking back the last 100 years, but looking ahead the next 100 years. Not just a ceremonial anniversary thing, but it is triggered by the fact that there are really a big mega trend, the changes in the world of work. Right. That we've seen globally, but affecting this region, Asia and the Pacific, as well as India. And our intention is that, first of all, try to understand it, but also call for the national debate and a dialogue, of course, the tripartite dialogue, to understand what it means and how the world of work is changing. And then the second step is that we will have the commission, the global high-level commission, and bringing the voice from the nations and then talk about it at the International Labour Conference, the global level. Particularly focusing on, of course, the ILO's role in that, but also the policy implications, not just to take in it, those trend is there, and I will talk about those trends later. Trend is there, we were at the mercy of all these trends, technology, robotization, and we can't do anything, what we call technology fatalism or technology, determinism. No, once we understand, analyze the implications, we do have to put in the mix of the policies to counter those trends, counter the negative implication, negative impact of those trends, and making sure still the social justice will not be jeopardized because of those trends. Some of the trends are very applicable to India as well. One is, as you might have seen, the global job crisis.
Which is huge, yes.
As the economy is contracting, I believe India is one of the very few countries which enjoys more than 7% growth rate, which is, I think, more than twice the average of the global average. But in overall job is not created enough compared with the new entrants, the number of new people coming in, number of people who may be retrenched by certain sectors and then looking for new jobs. So we believe that 2 million more people this year alone, could be even more, estimated, that added to already a very high number, 200 million and unemployed people. Next year 3 million. So overall trend is that in the near future we will not be able to have that kind of high growth path, and we see that trajectory continuing, and it affects the world work tremendously. The second one is the change of the employment relationship, so to speak. Since the World War II, the one place, one company, one employer, very standard form of employment has been the predominantly the case. Of course, as we will discuss perhaps later, the informal sector is there, but overall, the majority of the employment relationship was that. For the first time since the World War II, we've seen the decline of that standard form of the employment and contracted workers, outsourced, in the informal. Even if they are working in the formal sector, it is informal because you are just contracted for a short period of time, and so is increasing.
As a result, the benefits are not there.
Exactly.
Right.
Benefits are not there, protection is not there. It's a huge implication for the workers who are already vulnerable. So that's the second trend. The third trend is happening also is that even the growth in the past trend, the inequality is deepening and pervasive. The productivity is increasing, economic growth may happen in the past, but the share of that wealth is not equally distributed to the population, and therefore you have a very skewed way of the benefiting from the growth, what we call inclusive economic growth is not materializing in many parts of the world. So that's those are the changing trend in the world of work, triggered by, of course, the technological advancement. You will have robotization, the factories are changing the way that they organize, and also the demographic changes. You have young people, young population as what we call the demographic dividend, but at the same time very fast aging is happening, including in India, which means that it's very difficult. All these trends happening, still you have the problems carrying from the past. The economy is not growing fast enough. This means the policies to put in place is going to be very complex. Not a single one bullet will cure all these problems. So it has to be a very coherent, comprehensive policy in place, and it comes that which is in place, formulated and implemented through the broader consultation, workers and employers and the government. So that's where you can see the ILO's role is coming in very much, social dialogue to come up with the best ways of dealing with this complex situation at the national level, regional level, as well as global level. That's where the future of work concept has come in, and we're happy that more than 180 countries out of 187 member states are engaged and in the process of organizing the national tripartite discussion on the future of work.
So is there a targeted time frame for this?
Yes, 2016 is meant to have the national dialogue. Right. And 2017, probably by mid-2017, we'll have all these voices from the national consultation will come and collated and then summarized, aggregated, and have the commission, the global high-level commission, will be formed to have the expert debate. Could be I expect it could be very technical, but also very highly political discussion will take place in 2017 and going into this 2018, and all these recommendations coming out from that national and global level will be shared in 2019. Particularly at the International Labour Conference.
You yourself have been involved with the sustainable goals of development for the last 30-odd years. What exactly are the SDGs?
Particularly in the form of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals within the context of what we call 2030 Agenda. It's primarily trying to have three dimensions of sustainable development and address those three dimensions in a very integrated manner. Three dimensions are economic dimension, social dimension, and environmental dimension. If you look at the 17 goals, really from health, education, to job creation, to peace, disaster prevention, as well as biodiversity issues, clean water, clean energy. So those three dimensions are very well incorporated into the 17 goals. This was a 3-year, global, national level extensive consultation that as a result of that. So from the ILO point of view, we are very, very excited actually. For the first time, what we call decent work, the word decent work has been incorporated, enshrined at the core of the sustainable development.
What does decent work
Decent
mean?
work means there is the 4 elements of decent work. You will have not only just a job. Decent job, decent work means that you will have a proper working condition, the living wage, for example. And then you have the workers' rights properly incorporated. And you have the social protection that when you have a job comes along with the social protection. And finally the social dialogue. You have the mechanism where you can talk with the employers. So it's not just a job, and surprisingly, a lot of jobs being created is leading to the working poor, which means that you work so hard and then you get the wage less than even the minimum wage, and you can't put the food for the children. You're still working. So working poor is increasing. So what we say is that it's not just a job, it's not just a work. Decent job with all these 4 elements has to be at the center of addressing, for example, poverty. When you have a job, when you have a decent job, you will be addressing the poverty. When you have a social protection, there is an element in the goal 1, the social protection. You will be addressing a number of other elements. Well, women's empowerment is another.
Which is a huge issue, because there is always a parity.
Exactly. So inequality is incorporated. So we, from ILO's perspective, we see decent work, addressing the decent work issue, promoting the decent work agenda, what we call, is a ways of realizing or attaining the number of cross-sectoral, cross-cutting goals. So that's how we see in ILO the social sustainable development goals. And ultimately, if you see the 2030 agenda, it has a complete convergence between what they call for inclusive sustainable growth and the social justice mandate of ILO.
What is intriguing is green labor. You talk about environment as an important aspect of ILO when you talk about sustainable developmental goals. How do you incorporate the environment?
Well, there are a number of ways that I can see the linkages between greening the economy and ILO's mandate. Number one is that if you destroy the ecosystem, the land, in many countries, including India, agriculture is the sector which has a lot of workers, the biggest, in many countries, the largest number of workers. If you destroy the forest, if you destroy the land, or fisheries, if you destroy the stock, the fish stock, immediately the livelihood and the living condition of these workers in those sectors who are very much relying on the healthy ecosystem will be affected. So that's one. The second one is that we have growing opportunities, what we call green jobs. Tourism, you can think of the ecotourism and so on, but that's an easy one. While we will be seeing a lot of robotization happening, and we are losing, for example, manufacturing sector as a source of employment in the traditional sense. It's no longer. But at the same time, greening the economy is creating the green jobs. For example, let's say waste management areas, alternative energy, solar energy, other hydro energy, both in a bigger scale as well as the community level. If we unravel the opportunities, job opportunities, by that transition from the fossil-based brown economy to the green economy, there are a number of new jobs coming up. Just like the technological transformation is creating a lot of new jobs through the internet and so on, but also greening is creating a lot of new jobs. So what we were trying to do is that a just transition, what we call that, not just only to address the greenness and the environmental sustainability. It is very important that we package that environmental sustainability with the social justice incorporating the social justice and creating the good, decent jobs, contributing towards that transition from brown to green economy. So those are the elements that we could see, the linkages between the green economy, environmental sustainability, and our mandate, the world work. The issues related to labor market.
You talk about how digitization is creating a vacuum in jobs for labor, but the other thing is also the way economies have their own vicissitudes. So there are retrenchments all over the world because of the way things are at the moment across the world. Are there any kind of special do you have any kind of special factors for labor to protect them for this?
Well, I think that one of the things that is becoming clearer and clearer is the fact that in unequal distribution of the wealth and creating and deepening the inequality in any country is not only morally acceptable, but also now is the impediment of the economic growth.
Right.
So there's now a kind of so-called business case to address the inequality. As you can imagine, if you have a majority of the population not being able to have a proper purchasing power, and living just one day-to-day surviving, it's not good for the economy, even for the layman's eyes. And one after another, economics and research that not being able to address the growth of the small-scale industry to become vibrant, or the growth of the middle class, lower to the middle class, which can pull the economy, is becoming a big problem. Even in America, we will see the harrowing the middle class, so to speak, is slowing down, putting the brake to the economic growth. So now addressing the inequality, addressing the small scale industry, addressing the informal sector, addressing the women who are at the bottom, addressing the workers in agriculture in the rural areas who are really struggling, and putting the policies to address the constraints they have and allowing them to grow is the good for not only for them but also for the whole economy as well as the the global, because nowadays the one country's economic stagnation can affect the number of other countries. We are living in a very globalized society. So everywhere the inequality deepening is affecting and creating the vicious circle. And I think this is the time, and if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, that is very, very clearly incorporated the recognition at the highest level, because the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted at the General Assembly, at the summit level, the head of the states level. So there is a recognition at the highest level, political will also, to recognize inequality, to recognize the destruction of the ecosystem, and just not realizing shared sustainable development is an impediment for every country, and we must do something about it. And here comes the 17 goals that they committed.
Finally, I'd like to ask you about your impressions of India and what do you think are the challenges that are particular to India for you?
Well, India, I think, is good. Have lots of good news. You're a big country, population-wise, also the landmass-wise, very well recognized in many ways. Member of the BRICS, even in ILO context, it's a very important country. Some people say that when we make the difference in India, it can, change the dynamics, because so 25% of the poor population in India. If India is successfully addressing the inequality and the poverty, it sends a very strong message. You can do it, to the world. So that's a good message. I see also related to that there is a lot of a policy discussion coming out, Make India, Skills India,
and Swachh Bharat, which is about sanitation and cleanliness. Yes.
Right. So I had a lot of very strong determination to address a very complex issue, as such, at the national level, and also states. Every state's leadership is making an effort to address. So I think awareness is very strong. At the same time, many of the issues that we have discussed, women's participation, inequality, it's a very complex issue. So I hope that in addressing those skills issues and employment issues, that there will be a very strong gender equality, women empowerment element into it. And at the moment, I am 50% hopeful. This is my only 5 days, but it is definitely the interaction I have at the highest level. 80% to 90% the faces of men. So in terms of the participation, it is very male dominant. It becomes less of a problem if all these male leaders have a very strong gender-sensitive mind in it. But if it is the male face and then less of the discussion, then we will have to bring the women to the table and then raise those issues. So I think it is a very interesting turning point for India. 2016 is the first year of the Sustainable Development Goal. We have up to 2030, and I am hopeful that India will be an exemplary country that decisively make an effort to attain all these goals.
Well, we have the same hope that India will contribute and will participate actively in these sustainable goals. Thank you so much for being on our program.
Thank you for having me.
Viewers.
Thank you.
Thank you.